Humanity's accumulated miasma condenses into a crimson eye, looming over the mortal world, and that darkness takes physical form as demons, turning ordinary streets into feeding grounds, whose overwhelming strength has slaughtered people for centuries and kept entire generations living in terror. But humanity is not abandoned, because divine intervention finally delivers a proper counter: the manifestation blades, sacred weapons infused with enough power to wound the monsters, and the warriors chosen by those blades become demon slayers. Humanity's dedicated anti-demon specialists, capable of challenging nightmare-sized creatures instead of becoming their latest extremely unfortunate snack, while one supreme fighter unites the scattered slayers beneath a single banner: the Sword Emperor, strongest figure of every era and its undisputed symbol. With devastating swordsmanship, each emperor carves through demons like the difficult setting broke, leading the demon slayers in an endless defense of civilians across every generation. In the present day, judging a promising slayer apparently feels almost like love at first sight, yet the Academy pressures its recruiter to choose quickly from several admirable candidates. While he insists raw heroism is insufficient, he wants overwhelming selfishness, the kind that never breaks. Even as his phone serves another painfully polished advertisement featuring the same photogenic celebrity, and the caller keeps begging for a decision before patience files its own resignation. That hesitant recruiter is Kaname Akuda, the current Sword Emperor, now weighing his next move. As morning arrives over a modern school district and students pour through the streets, where one late arrival races forward just as a purple spell circle ignites beneath him, only for the stocky student to launch an Onmyoto-powered gale kick straight into the chaos, sending the latecomer headfirst into a trash pile while nearby pedestrians barely react. And 17-year-old Kamakiri Haruto surfaces wearing a banana peel like fate's cheapest accessory. He tosses it aside, tells young Rika to stay careful, and resumes his walk, as neighborhood mothers discuss escorting children because manifestation blade kidnappings have recently increased, with Rika's glowing stigmata of revelation making her valuable enough to attract dangerous attention. They call her a national treasure, which makes supervised pickups sound less paranoid than practical, because those favored by God receive a revelation and manifest their own divine blade, a miracle requiring spiritual energy, though the same crowd admits exceptions can exist, and one gossiping woman needs only a glance to identify the neighborhood's infamous example. Haruto has absolutely no spiritual energy, a fact bystanders announce with all the subtlety of patch notes, before adding that his parents died in an accident, and his adoptive relatives suffered afterward. Spiritual energy supposedly guides the gods toward talented humans and unlocks their revelation, so he recognizes the familiar insult, but the woman even finish setting it up. Everyone calls Haruto by a title designed to turn exclusion into public entertainment: the one abandoned by God, a label he has endured for as long as he remembers. Being the only person without expected spiritual energy has always made him a foreign object, leaving no place among ordinary families and no invitation to the gifted crowd either, while classmates reduce his future to one question: if he cannot control Shikigami, what can he do? Nobody wants him as a partner, and nobody expects anything, an efficient little social deletion combo until a notebook slams onto a desk, snapping the classroom out of its usual routine, revealing 3 older classmates who surround his chair and offer another lesson in knowing his place, their gray-haired ringleader cheerfully inviting him to play the same violent game again, while Haruto recognizes that reminds of his status are waiting absolutely everywhere he looks. The attacker channels Onmyoto into a purple Shikigami technique, winding up his favorite move, then unleashes Perfect Hurricane and sends the defenseless student spinning out of the classroom, through overturned desks and straight toward the school's trash area with zero concern for landing fees. He crashes among garbage cans, earning the attacker a strike and a 20-point lead, while the battered teenager curls on the pavement, already shaking from the pain. The gray-haired bully orders more bins arranged because their human bowling game is only halfway finished, but Haruto can barely move and admits he has reached his physical limit, so the attacker reports his disobedience to Hibiki, the blonde student watching from nearby, who rises with a girl on his arm and reminds everyone of today's assigned role. Haruto is the ball, meaning objections have apparently been patched out of the rules. Hibiki pins him down, dismisses the protest, and demands whether anyone expects him to lie, before summoning a blazing manifestation blade and bringing its heated edge toward Haruto's hand. Claiming he only wants his friend to enjoy school, Hibiki burns the trapped student's palm, as even his companions whisper about the blonde bully's rumored ties to a Yakuza underboss. The blade keeps searing while Haruto pleads for the pain to stop and mercy to start, yet Hibiki calmly threatens the other hand unless his victim accepts the humiliating role, forcing the injured boy to surrender, call himself their ball, and promise complete obedience. Left alone among the scattered bins, Haruto wonders why every punishment keeps choosing him, because he did nothing to provoke it, yet still absorbs the consequences every single time. A faculty worker finally discovers the scene and shouts after the departing bullies. But Hibiki ignores him, asks whether tonight's preparations are ready, and receives a nervous confirmation. The worker addresses Kamakiri only after everyone leaves, already tired of finding him involved, and once again treats the victim as the student responsible for causing trouble, ordering him to clean the entire mess while Haruto silently predicts the blame. With no allies willing to defend him, the teenager swallows another accusation alone, having abandoned the idea of asking anyone for help a long time ago. His isolation echoes beneath an old Tohoku disaster, where a massive demonic domain once appeared, unleashing a super-colossal demon until the Sword Emperor intervened and kept casualties minimal. Nearby, Rika excitedly shows the report to her father and praises the legendary Slayer, declaring she will become a demon slayer, rise to Sword Emperor, and protect everyone someday. While her supportive father celebrates her manifestation blade and Haruto recognizes the girl from that morning. Watching their easy warmth, he quietly wishes for spiritual energy and the future it could unlock. When a violent bang interrupts the moment and Rika's father confronts hidden attackers, only for a flaming blade to strike him down as the girl screams for her dad. Masked kidnappers immediately seize Rika, silence her, and order her thrown into their waiting car. But Haruto recognizes the voices and edges toward the alley, alarm replacing his earlier resignation, as the same armed attacker lashes out again, leaving Rika's father unable to intervene. The familiar blade identifies Hibiki as the hidden swordsman, tying the school assault directly to kidnapping. But the van tears away before Haruto can process how badly the situation has escalated, leaving him beside Rika's wounded father, an abandoned bag as the vehicle disappears. With no witnesses around, he weighs calling for help against chasing a kidnapping crew alone, and every survival instinct insists this nightmare has absolutely nothing to do with him. Then Rika's father weakly calls her name, forcing Haruto to confront what walking away means, because the familiar question, why must he suffer, now belongs to someone else, and despite cursing himself, our guy bolts after the van before fear can win. He phones emergency services with the location while wondering what a powerless student can accomplish, then tracks the kidnappers to a moonlit construction site where their van stops. Barely catching up, he hides near the parked vehicle and struggles to breathe quietly, peering toward a lit site office while keeping the kidnappers' escape route in sight. Inside, two men remove their masks, complaining about the heat and exposing familiar faces, which confirms Hibiki's gray-haired and brown-haired followers are guarding the abducted girl somewhere nearby, while Hibiki takes a smoke break to make a call and orders them to watch her. Haruto knows Rika must be inside, yet the three criminals still control the entire site, and although he already called police, another escape attempt could carry her beyond reach. So when the van begins moving, blue force gathers around his hand and nearby stones, before he slams his palm against the vehicle, releasing power no supposedly helpless student should possess, and sends it rocketing past the guards, who can only stare after their departing transportation. The accomplices rush outside to inspect the runaway van, exactly as Haruto hoped they would, and their empty office door clicks open while the improvised alarm keeps pulling them away, letting him slip inside and find Rika bound, gagged, and shaking behind the furniture. The terrified girl struggles against the ropes until she notices her unexpected rescuer, but he calms her, removes the gag, and promises he came specifically to save her. After freeing her hands and ankles, he checks whether she can walk and urges immediate escape, earning a tearful thank you from Rika before they creep toward the exit together, until she suddenly hugs him, catching the chronically rejected teenager completely off guard. That simple gratitude feels so unfamiliar he barely understands it, though danger keeps them moving, because nobody in his entire life has ever thanked him for doing anything. He decides helping was worth every risk, right before Hibiki catches them outside and strikes, driving a brutal kick into Haruto and dropping him before Rika can escape. Hibiki mocks the surprise arrival, joking that today's human ball somehow rolled across town, while his followers return with clubs and surround the would-be hero for round 2. They resume their earlier game by using Haruto as batting practice while threatening him into silence, and every blow leaves him gasping, but he focuses on buying time for police, begging loudly for help and mercy while keeping the kidnappers' attention fixed on himself, even as the laughing guards insist nobody is coming to rescue their usual punching bag. If a powerless loser can delay them long enough, Haruto decides that sacrifice is finally useful, until an unknown silver-haired man arrives, praising Hibiki for completing the job so quickly. Hibiki addresses the newcomer as underboss and insists he simply followed the man's instructions, who explains newly awakened blade wielders can become disposable soldiers or luxury merchandise, while bodies overflowing with spiritual energy also fetch value as raw materials for darker purposes. The underboss finally notices the battered student bound nearby and asks why he is there, so Hibiki calls him a witness under punishment, only to receive an immediate execution order. With cleanup approved, the blonde kidnapper summons his blazing manifestation blade and approaches his victim, while Haruto strains against the ropes and wonders why police still have not arrived, realizing every wasted second brings his death closer and leaves Rika in their hands. Refusing to watch another innocent person disappear, he shouts for them to release the girl, but Hibiki silences the so-called ball with a brutal thrust from his burning weapon, leaving blood across Haruto's shirt as the blade withdraws and his strength drains away. His bound body crumples as he curses the outcome, caring only that Rika still deserves rescue, when an unseen voice announces their connection, dragging his consciousness somewhere beyond the construction site. Haruto awakens sprawled across a barren realm filled with countless swords and drifting violet light, then rises in confusion, remembering the stabbing but understanding neither his survival nor location. Checking his chest, he discovers the wound has vanished despite feeling certain Hibiki pierced him, until a disembodied speaker identifies this place as his mental world, where physical injuries cannot follow. The voice explains Death's Edge finally forced him to look inward and establish contact, while Haruto searches everywhere except directly ahead, where a colossal stone face opens its violet eye. One glance upward reveals the speaker towering before him, and confusion briefly rage quits language. And the creature introduces itself as Matsukami, an existence abandoned even by the gods, leaving Haruto stunned that a supposed god of manifestation blades could resemble this walking apocalypse. Magatsukami offers Kamakiri Haruto a pact. One demand will be granted, but there is a condition. Once he makes that wish, he must dedicate everything he has toward the entity's own goal. The shocked teenager struggles to answer as a shadowy tendril curls beneath his chin, and his host makes the alternative brutally simple. Refuse the bargain and rot exactly as he is. Instead, he must price the demand with his life and ask for something worth fulfilling, prompting Haruto to recognize the nightmare framing while believing its promise could still be genuine. His first answer is saving Rika, because the captive girl's suffering brought him here. Yet he admits that rescue alone is not the desire burning deepest beneath all those scars. What he truly demands power, enough for someone with nothing to save everything he chooses, and Magatsukami challenges whether this supposed sacrifice is genuinely being offered for other people. Haruto immediately rejects that heroic interpretation because his reason is far more personal. Until today, he merely wandered through life without purpose, feeling dead long before Hibiki struck. Then Rika relied on him and offered gratitude, awakening an emotion years of neglect never produced, so rescuing her made him feel genuinely alive for the first time in memory. To experience that feeling again, he will gladly stake his life on this bargain, and for his own sake demands strength capable of carving through everything before him. Magatsukami approves the enormous desire as fitting, though equal value must govern their exchange. Before 10 rune-covered blades emerge in violet light, heralding the entity's glorious powers, and offers him the found claw, one of Magatsukami's weapons, as the pact's first answer. In exchange for his life, Haruto receives permission to wield that power however his heart desires. While outside, the kidnappers begin carrying Rika away. Believing their troublesome witness permanently handled, a sudden disturbance makes Hibiki and the underboss look back, neither prepared for what follows. Revelation erupts beneath a blood-red moon, marking divine power descending upon another human, because such moments distort the world with anomalous phenomena whenever gods empower their chosen vessels. A Sword Emperor-class revelation is normally celebrated as an omen of tremendous good fortune, filling witnesses with happiness and awe as radiant colors proclaim a future champion. This one instead plants an ominous crimson sword into the construction site, rewriting the atmosphere completely. Under a burning sky more reminiscent of an evacuation notice than a blessing, the spectacle varies with its god status, leaving Hibiki unable to explain the nightmare overhead. As Haruto returns with silver hair, glowing red eyes, the found claw, and a suffocating aura, he advances through the crimson haze and repeats one demand: let the girl go. The kidnappers recoil because their dead victim is walking back toward them with interest, and the enormous black-red blade in his hand confirms this resurrection arrived fully armed. Hibiki recognizes it as a manifestation blade, an impossibility for someone supposedly lacking spiritual energy, but the underboss dismisses his fear, deciding one valuable captive allows them to dispose of Haruto. The transformed teenager raises his weapon and repeats himself once more, every word now carrying weight, while Hibiki mocks a newly awakened amateur for getting arrogant before his first real lesson. The blonde slayer brings his flaming blade down, promising his opponent time for regret in the afterlife. But Haruto meets the descending fire without flinching, red eyes fixed on his former tormentor, and catches the attack with his black blade as sparks explode across the construction site, then effortlessly shears the flaming weapon apart, leaving Hibiki holding half a sword and zero confidence, before a counterswing detonates the ground and launches the stunned attacker violently backward. The former tormentor hurtles helplessly through the air, panic replacing every trace of earlier amusement, carried across the site by a black-red wave powerful enough to tear through the surroundings. On this day, the boy everyone abandoned recognizes that he has finally obtained power, a blade capable of severing the fate assigned to someone ignored by the entire world, transforming a nobody into the person now holding his own future at sword point. Elsewhere, an urgent caller contacts the Sword Emperor beneath the spreading crimson sky, while Kaname Akuta watches from a ramen stall, notes the unprecedented scale, and requests another serving. The caller is horrified that dinner continues while this revelation surpasses an ordinary good omen, demanding an immediate investigation as Kaname insists priorities include finishing ramen. Catastrophe has met lunch break. He thanks the vendor and finally departs, carrying his sheathed weapon beneath the fading night, explaining that every revelation still moves through human desire, not its supernatural appearance alone, and judging whether that desire is good or evil remains the Sword Emperor's responsibility. Back at the construction site, the kidnapper's blue van waits outside the steel framework. While Rika lies unconscious on the ground, breathing steadily but unable to respond, Haruto rushes over as Magatsukami assures him the 10 Claws sword aura only made her faint. Relief softens his face, prompting the entity to note that the rescuer looks calmer than the rescued. Even with Rika safe, Haruto stares across the unconscious kidnappers and struggles to believe he caused this, while Magatsukami declares its promise fulfilled and reminds him that his half of the bargain begins now. The entity starts revealing its objective, but its violet apparition thins before the crucial words arrive. and the connection weakens so badly that Haruto can no longer hear the answer. Before fading, Magatsukami orders him to draw out the blade's true value and listen carefully. Though references to connections and hidden value leave its brand new wielder understandably lost, the last audible warning tells him never to forget their deal, then dissolves into smoke, leaving Haruto gripping the weapon and wondering how anyone extracts power without an instruction manual. Nearby, the underboss secretly staggers behind stacked materials, searching for a route away, horrified that this revived monster appeared and revealed strength far beyond anything he expected. Remembering Hibiki's defeat, the criminal realizes the newcomer is dramatically more dangerous than his former enforcer, and decides survival requires abandoning the entire operation before involvement becomes fatal tonight. Only to find Kaname standing beside him, calmly taking a picture and asking whether this angle works. The phone identifies the fugitive as Shunpei Ida, young boss of the Agahiji syndicate with extensive crimes. Shunpei lunges in fury at the stranger who casually exposed him and demands attention, but Kaname's effortless response makes the attacker's head and hand appear to fly away, a sight that freezes Haruto behind his raised weapon, uncertain what he just witnessed. Before the Sword Emperor reveals Shunpei already secured and lightly scolds him for doing bad things, Haruto realizes the decapitation was apparently a hallucination, though his nerves received no such clarification. Then Kaname approaches, asks whether the boy caused this destruction, and receives a cautious confirmation. And the stranger calls himself a passing demon slayer, presenting a valid license instead of his prestigious title. Behind the casual introduction, Kaname studies the trench carved through the yard and calls its aftermath incredible, especially because every kidnapper was only blown away without receiving a single cut wound. A pale aura gathers as his eyes sharpen, suggesting the newcomer has already noticed something troubling, while Haruto grips the enormous black-red weapon, still unaware how closely it is being evaluated. Kaname asks whether he truly just obtained a manifestation blade capable of producing this much power, because the ominous spiritual energy leaking from it matches a revelation that resembled a natural disaster. His conclusion is blunt. Haruto's blade appears to house a god that is distinctly not benevolent. Remembering Magatsukami's horrifying true form, Haruto cannot honestly argue at all with that assessment, especially when his mental image turns the entity's villainous laughter into its own closing statement. Kaname smiles, agrees with himself, and casually announces that he will have to break the blade. Haruto barely manages a confused response before the supposed inspector suddenly moves again, slamming his sword down as the found claw rises just fast enough to block, and their collision blasts a massive hole through the construction site, launching debris upward. The teenager crashes beside shattered concrete, realizing this surprise inspection could genuinely have killed him. While Kaname floats beyond the broken opening, coat drifting as though gravity accepted his credentials, he explains demon slayers protect not only against demons but also the world's peace. That leaves the battered swordsman coughing through dust while his red-black blade continues pulsing beside him. Kaname admits surprise that it survived and praises Haruto for holding on through his restrained attack, but warns clinging to such dangerous power is unhealthy, claiming he has no desire to harm him. Haruto understands a licensed slayer considers the weapon dangerous, but cannot accept surrendering it without resistance, because this strength was purchased with his life and explicitly entrusted to his own desire. Kaname gives him one final chance to release the blade quietly, confidence never leaving his expression, yet the exhausted teenager plants his feet and shouts that he will not surrender it. Golden energy erupts around Kaname as he apologizes, calling the coming destruction another unavoidable duty, while Haruto tightens both hands around the hilt and refuses to loosen his grip. Because after finally finding power, every instinct rejects letting another person take it away. Kaname closes the distance instantly, their swords colliding again beneath a sweeping golden arc, then slides past his opponent's guard while both fighters pivot for the next exchange, forcing Haruto into a desperate two-handed block as bright impact bursts against his chest. Successive lines carve the air faster than his eyes can comfortably follow, keeping his blade permanently defensive, and repeated shocks hammer the unfinished building until the entire structure seems to groan with them. Another impact sends Haruto tumbling between falling slabs, his recovery becoming less graceful each second. Yet he keeps the weapon overhead while debris chases him through the damaged interior, as golden trajectories multiply across the battlefield, turning one swordsman into an attack coming from everywhere. Though Kaname acknowledges his intuition while attacks weave a luminous cage around their target, Haruto realizes the Slayer's speed continues rising, pushing his exhausted body against its absolute limit, while Kaname says he understands attachment to disproportionate power at least to some degree, before another precise cut draws blood near Haruto's temple and interrupts every possible reply. Holding the golden blade upright, Kaname asks what desire could justify using such dangerous power. Haruto answers that he wants to help people, earning admiration but not the trust he desperately needs, so he meets the Slayer's eyes across their blades and insists his answer is completely serious. Saving the kidnapped girl made him feel alive for the first time, transforming gratitude into undeniable purpose. Yet his examiner argues that sensation may simply be intoxication supplied by a manifestation blade, because joy from helping could become joy from killing once the cutting itself feels rewarding. Then power would own its wielder. So the Golden Swordsman descends with another merciless strike, whose impact tears through the structure again, burying their debate beneath steel and concrete. Before Kaname clarifies, he does not reject the boy, only claims good deeds require no supernatural weapon. Exhausted, the teenager braces beside the pulsing found claw, breathing hard but still refusing surrender. While his examiner privately admits the last slash surpassed amateur skill and could become dangerously decisive, this weapon could deliver salvation or ruin, making its young owner a genuine double-edged sword. Unwilling to prolong his suffering, the Slayer raises one golden edge and declares their battle finished, then unleashes a radiant descending strike powerful enough to turn the ruined sight blinding white. And the crushing pressure forces its terrified target to realize exactly how helpless he remains, trembling even harder than when he already died once, with blood and dust covering him. The stronger swordsman warns this attack means death, offering mercy only if the boy drops his blade. Instead, the battered teenager steadies his expression and quietly reaches the answer he believes matters. Knowing help remains possible without power, but some people may be unreachable without this weapon. So the teenager shouts that discarding such a chance would be an unforgivable waste. The Sword Emperor freezes at that reply, repeating the word as surprise finally cracks his calm composure. The Sword Emperor smiles at the word waste, finally seeing the conviction hidden beneath that desperate answer, but accepts blame for failing to persuade him and raises the golden blade once more. Their weapons crash head-on, flooding the wreckage with red and gold force as neither retreats, while Magatsukami's voice cuts through the pressure, reminding its partner that their pact already secured this weapon, one of its 10 claws, the third finger formerly known as decisive slashing. Its ability creates an edge capable of cutting whatever its wielder consciously chooses to cut, and spiritual energy sharpens that decision without limit, letting the black-red blade overpower the golden assault. As he roars through the collision and commits every remaining ounce of strength, red-black arcs erupt across the crater, sending the surprised slayer backward while shattered steel spins away, because he chooses to cut through every obstacle standing between him and those needing salvation. Then springs forward after the breakthrough, raising the weapon for one final decisive follow-up. Landing hard, he suddenly falters from exhaustion, confused when no counterattack reaches him, and realizes the opposing blade broke during their clash. Though his own hand refuses to release its weapon, behind him, the Sword Emperor stands unharmed yet visibly impressed, catching the fallen fighter completely off guard. Before observing that even after breaking one weapon, the victor still will not release his own, then sheathing his weapon and declaring that he will trust the heart behind that stubbornness. Haruto stares upward in disbelief, understandably struggling to process how execution just became approval. His former opponent abandons any intention of destroying the blade and immediately treats the injured arm, revealing that demon slayers communicate through their weapons, making sword fights a brutally efficient interview, and their clash carried no falsehood in the teenager's desire to help others for personal fulfillment. The Sword Emperor explains that the final strike exposed a glimpse of his opponent's soul and sincere purpose, so holding that purpose firmly will keep the blade safe, removing every reason to confiscate it. Relieved, Haruto apologizes for breaking what he assumes was the Slayer's precious weapon during their clash, because a manifestation blade normally represents its owner's life, making the damage seem catastrophically personal, until the collector reveals it was merely a replica sword, instantly shrinking that guilt to hobby grade. More importantly, this eccentric examiner warns that his trust alone will not satisfy everyone else. So the dangerous newcomer must prove himself by learning to handle the manifestation blade correctly. Fortunately, his new mentor offers help and already knows an opening perfectly suited for that education, beginning with a recommendation for the entrance examination at one specific academy. The proposal leaves the exhausted candidate staring blankly, apparently unprepared for recruitment after attempted execution. Yet the destination is Tugoku Academy, celebrated as the gateway for aspiring demon slayers, where the Sword Emperor wants him to train toward officially joining their ranks. 2 days later, crowds fill the imposing campus beneath a pagoda and clear winter sky. While Haruto arrives carrying a recommendation letter and almost no preparation beyond the warning, he actually accepted the invitation, though his nervous smile admits the schedule showed absolutely no mercy. National Tujin High School is introduced as the country's highest training institution, producing elite demon slayers, and the applicant wonders whether every intimidating person around him is taking the same examination, quickly noticing that each competitor already possesses a manifestation blade and looks prepared to use it. Refusing to remain empty-handed, he summons the red-black weapon while ominous energy coils around its hilt, and remembers the command to draw out its true worth, making today's examination immediately personal. Holding the silent weapon, Haruto wonders whether drawing out more power will restore contact with its hidden god, because no voice has answered since the construction site, leaving every question trapped behind the hilt. Still, he promises to use this blade to save someone, sharpening determination where conversation failed, and admits he finally found a purpose worth giving everything he has to accomplish. The Sword Emperor suddenly praises that spirit from behind, scaring the focused applicant harder than the exam. Then finally introduces himself as Akuda, apparently treating ambush-level proximity as normal social etiquette. So his grateful beneficiary thanks him for the recommendation, then admits receiving absolutely no detailed explanation. The entrance process consists of 3 separate tests. His relaxed sponsor explains while raising 3 fingers, with 100 points available per test and the combined 300-point score deciding admission. Having never learned blade theory or formal combat, the applicant can only hope raw determination somehow compensates, though Akuda's cheerful thumbs up inspires substantially less confidence than its owner appears to expect. Before doubt can continue, an announcement summons examinees with tickets to the first testing venue, a written test covering general knowledge, which sounds almost merciful after everything outside. Before they separate, Akuda asks what path the candidate intends to walk with that blade, and receives a quiet affirmation, enough for both men to part with mutual expectation. The determined examinee heads inside with a raised fist and announces that he is ready. Anxiety remains, but faith in his sponsor's promise keeps him moving toward the assigned room, where signs direct candidates into classrooms and he resolves to give the examination everything. A massive stack of pages awaits, yet years of studying without spiritual energy support his confidence, until basic demon hunting studies. Practical studies reveals the syllabus has chosen violence first. The exam begins, and its victim immediately questions which part of this nightmare qualifies as general knowledge, since question 1 demands 5 principles for Earth release escape techniques derived from elemental generation and overcoming, leaving the untrained applicant staring at the page as panic replaces every ounce of confidence. Subsequent problems demand demon status observation and spiritual stargazing, subjects he could not possibly know, while Akuda calmly eats outside, believing 70 points are guaranteed if someone simply knows the basics, and other examinees emerge comparing scores in the 80s, unaware one paper has become a crime scene. The shattered candidate leaves unable to answer anything, his first 100 points apparently buried before the practical tests, when the familiar faculty worker recognizes the silver-haired youth and demands to know why he came. Seeing his former student at Tujin High, the man reacts with contempt instead of surprise, and immediately calls him a lifelong troublemaker, reopening every old humiliation with casual precision. The shaken boy explains that a demon slayer recommended him, barely managing to finish the sentence, but the furious employee accuses him of lying and orders the examination ticket produced. He obediently hands it over, too stunned by the confrontation to resist or question the demand, while memories of school isolation and punishment make his entire body shudder beneath the calm exterior. The ticket proves genuine, forcing the doubtful adult to pause as disbelief replaces certainty, until its recorded written score reveals an almost impossible 2 points out of 100. Instead of sympathy, the faculty worker demands that the teenager recognize his supposed place, and nearby candidates identify Kamakiri as the god-abandoned student, wondering why he was admitted. Their mockery calls him uneducated, powerless trash, while the adult tears his valid ticket apart, declaring this examination an insult to demon slayers and ordering its humiliated owner to leave. Satisfied with the damage, the bullies walk away together, already searching for their next entertainment, while their target remembers Akuda asking what path he will choose and refuses to surrender that future. Kneeling among the torn pieces, he gathers himself instead of obeying the order to disappear, then rises and reaches the massive stadium assigned as the second examination venue. This round assesses manifestation blade abilities before hundreds of candidates spread across multiple sections, separating destructive powers that directly attack targets from every less straightforward specialty, including support abilities that strengthen or assist another wielder throughout dangerous combat situations, and healing abilities capable of restoring living targets through supernatural growth or recovery. Examinees move into matching booths, where weapons blaze in every color as their functions are demonstrated, while a pink-haired proctor welcomes the Destruction Group's star unit, whose frontline duty carries the greatest danger, then explains their practical task is simply slashing a massive demon-shaped stone statue. Its durability matches an intermediate demon, so incomplete abilities will leave their users hurting instead, and anyone finished charging may step forward freely, a sentence that instantly reduces volunteer enthusiasm, until Examinee 104 charges with green energy and delivers a full-force descending cut, only for the weapon to rebound and send its owner stumbling away in pain. Spectators realize the statue exceeds steel when that manifestation blade cannot penetrate its surface, but the proctor awards 50 points for one slight scratch, proving even minor damage deserves respect. Another candidate charges a broadsword with crackling golden lightning and screams through the strain, then drives it into the statue, carving a visibly deeper wound amid exploding sparks, earning 65 points and a calm not bad from the proctor despite that dramatic effort. The faculty worker warmly congratulates Sato, proudly calling the 65-point performer his school's ace, while Sato attributes the clean wound to electricity and privately recognizes a serious gap in ability. That gap becomes a canyon when a teal-haired swordsman calmly shears the entire statue apart, earning the proctor's rare praise as shattered stone crashes behind his untouched posture, and a perfect 100 points that leaves both Sato and his former instructor trembling. The crowd demands the stranger's identity, suddenly aware they are watching someone from another league. But the swordsman merely sheathes his ornate blade while everyone falls silent around him, then tells the noisy examinees to concentrate on their own weapons instead of celebrating his performance. Even the proctor feels the atmosphere submit to that simple motion and pities whoever follows, because the pressure surrounding this candidate will not disappear soon. However quietly he walks away. From the stadium balcony, the Sword Emperor and a blonde official observe the destruction field below, identifying the prodigy as the Ryudoji family's second son, born into prestigious swordsmanship, whose top admission already seems inevitable while the official praises this year's candidate quality. The Sword Emperor repeats quality with a knowing smile that makes the compliment sound unexpectedly complicated, then assures his suspicious colleague that he intends to judge every examinee equally without taking sides. Meanwhile, the perfect scorer dismisses the surrounding level as unworthy and disgraceful to Tujin High, only to collide face first with Haruto rushing into the section late, briefly puncturing that regal atmosphere. The late arrival apologizes repeatedly and explains his delay, while the prodigy steadies himself in irritation, then notices the field has gone unnaturally quiet and looks around for any remaining activity. Wondering whether the test already ended, he asks his new acquaintance, who offers absolutely no useful answer. As the proctor prepares to close the section, Haruto volunteers as examinee 1042 at the last second, drawing a contemptuous click from the prodigy, who considers late arrival further proof of poor standards. Yet, the ornate manifestation blade suddenly reacts to this supposedly clumsy stranger, making its owner whirl around, while he nearly trips again and the proctor calmly tells him to regain control. He presents the painstakingly reassembled ticket, politely requesting fair treatment despite its new puzzle piece aesthetic, and the taped document confirms both his identity and brutal 2-point written score. The proctor accepts it without argument, tells him to begin whenever ready, and receives an eager salute. As Sato and the faculty worker watch skeptically, certain someone without spiritual energy cannot perform. Standing alone before the replacement statue, the last challenger lowers his gaze and settles his breathing, recalling every command to know his place while red-black energy floods from the summoned blade. Instead of accepting their verdict, he releases a towering crimson-black surge that engulfs the entire target, shocking the proctor, the balcony officials, and every witness who expected another harmless rebound, while the swordsman's red eyes sharpen and his full weight drives the stroke through. Later, the Ryudoji heir hears praise for his perfect score and assurances about the third test, until a caller mentions another examinee carrying a personal recommendation from the Sword Emperor. He urgently asks whether the report is true and learns the recommended candidate is Kamakiri Haruto, the same novice whose rough, uncontrolled strike still connected and devastated the stone target, precisely because the manifestation blade's reaction to that lack of refinement was unmistakably genuine. Remembering their collision, the prodigy realizes this awkward latecomer caused his blade's mysterious response, while the exhausted wielder remains amid smoke and shattered ground, gripping the found claw after its overwhelming release. Complete destruction earns Haruto a perfect 100 points, matching the prodigy's score through overwhelming force, though he can barely remain upright after choosing to advance for the purpose he finally found. Every year produces another diamond in the rough, and this crimson-scared battlefield has revealed one more. Yet inside the examiner's lounge, recordings of every standout performance surround the assembled evaluators, whose attention settles on this year's particularly intriguing gem, captured exhausted on one screen. The Sword Emperor smiles from his seat, convinced he found something exceptional and inviting agreement, but the blonde official refuses, keeping his arms crossed and his judgment distinctly colder. He sensed the sinister aura dwelling inside the blade and challenges the Sword Emperor's decision, calling the boy he brought back not a gem, but a dangerous seed of trouble. The Sword Emperor hoped Kusabi would watch him, yet the official predicts failure before supervision becomes necessary, prompting the seated swordsman to propose a wager and immediately capture his skeptical colleague's attention, betting that the recommended candidate will take first place, with the official becoming his trainer if proven wrong. The straight-faced official asks what happens if the wager instead turns against its architect, and receives an open promise to grant any wish within the reigning Sword Emperor's power, terms that generous secure his colleague's agreement, sealing their private contest before the decisive examination, whose third stage will test the essential qualities required of every genuine demon slayer, giving the doubtful official a direct measure of how much potential the troublesome and candidate truly possesses. Haruto enters a dark, cramped hall where personal space has already failed its own exam, carrying 102 total points and resolving to erase his written test deficit through whatever challenge comes next. Before a bearded proctor rings his bell, commands attention, and officially begins the third examination. The massive doors open before a tense crowd, finally revealing what awaits beyond the warehouse. A 3-hour demon hunt where applicants must kill as many targets as possible for points. Conducted inside the Academy's own restricted hunting ground, commonly called the Demon Preserve, a surrounding forest infused with miasma and managed to contain demons from low through intermediate level. Hearing that intermediate monsters roam the grounds leaves Haruto wondering whether the organizers have lost perspective, while the proctor explains that every applicant received a dog tag capable of forced medical evacuation. But activation ends the attempt immediately and awards 0 points for the entire third exam. The tag's reverse side doubles as a rulebook because mortal peril apparently still needs fine print, and the enormous gap between demon values rewards candidates who judge danger instead of chasing impossible glory. The explanation ends as one anxious contender resolves to strike first and fight without restraint. However, a single shoe steps forward while the proctor reveals one final complications. Simultaneous entry would cause chaos, so only candidates holding at least 191 points may begin, bringing 3 elite scorers forward while everyone beneath their threshold remains inside the hall. Led by Ryu Doji Toya, whose 198 points place him first after near-perfect results. Successive groups will enter every 5 minutes as the required score drops toward 181 points, leaving the lowest-ranked candidates waiting 45 minutes before their turn finally arrives. The proctor advises the final entrant not to overextend himself, receiving a nervous but respectful answer. Once the last group receives permission, the silver-haired swordsman launches forward with remarkable urgency, while the official privately marvels that anyone's earlier performance could leave such a brutal total. And Haruto races deeper because every demon near the entrance has probably been claimed already. Haruto marvels at a suddenly light body and breathtaking speed, both far beyond previous limits, recalling the impossible movements achieved while surviving the Sword Emperor's relentless training assault, and recognizing the internal power that has continued swelling since the Manifestation Blade's arrival. Bounding across boulders becomes almost effortless as that unfamiliar strength drives every accelerating step, until sharpened red eyes catch a hostile presence moving through the forest ahead, and spiritual energy reveals itself as physical reinforcement far beyond previous human limits. The first genuine leap feels like flight, producing enough private celebration to endanger the landing, because this extraordinary perception and movement finally reveal the world other wielders always experienced. A dark shape suddenly intercepts that joyful sprint before confidence can become situational awareness. Before one careless opening ends against a tree, turning the forest into a correctional instructor, and the horned demon's dripping jaws promise a direct follow-up would be considerably less educational, yet surprise follows when the collision leaves no meaningful injury despite its violent appearance. The blow was lighter than expected because this attacker is only a low-level demon, especially compared with the crushing strike endured during the Sword Emperor's earlier lesson. So the found claw flashes free and carves through the lunging creature in one counterattack. Realizing the monster poses no real threat, replaces fear with a fierce, almost disbelieving grin, and one successful kill proves genuine combat is possible, inspiring a determined push to preserve that momentum. Elsewhere, a ponytailed swordswoman discovers 4 demons while her group advances deeper into the preserve, prompting an orange-haired teammate to demand properly timed support instead of another delayed response, while their blonde companion releases green energy around her blade and nervously promises cooperation. The orange-haired fighter unleashes Rockflow Bind, hurling stones and golden restraints across the charging demon pack, but one target breaks through until the ponytailed swordswoman answers with a violet-rending blaze. She dismisses the numbers as low-level opposition and predicts coordinated teamwork could place them near the top. That promotion forecast expires instantly when an unseen strike severs her sword arm cleanly away, and the wounded candidate's glowing dog tag triggers before shock can even become panic, activating the forced return spell and extracting her while the surviving pair stare into the dark. They realize an intermediate demon has arrived, transforming an easy point harvest into immediate survival. Before the orange-haired fighter attacks overhead and completely misses the creature racing beneath him, whose counterstrike launches the second teammate backward through a wall of splintering trees. Blood and blue light erupt together as another dog tag automatically begins emergency extraction, leaving the blonde swordswoman alone, unable even to track the intermediate monster's movements, while the dark creature appears directly behind her and raises a bladed limb to strike. Haruto arrives first, slicing through that bladed limb and interrupting the creature's fatal approach, then twists around the wounded demon's remaining charge, keeping the sudden rescue moving instead of celebrating, allowing the blonde swordswoman to drive her own blade into the exposed monster and complete the counterattack. She watches the newcomer crouch beside the fallen intermediate and wonders who just saved her, while the silver-haired stranger turns with such innocent concern that recognition briefly seems inevitable, yet she mistakes him for someone from the famous Ryu Doji family, as he apologizes for stealing her kill, then honestly admits she was in danger and thanks the stranger instead of disputing ownership. The relieved applicant responds with a full prostration, upgrading a simple apology into ceremonial surrender. Haruto springs upright and cheerfully says she is welcome, although the rescued woman still wonders exactly why. Before they exchange encouragement and the silver-haired swordsman leaps away toward the next opportunity, celebrating another successful rescue with the unfiltered joy of someone finally feeling useful again. A strategy forms. Follow battle sounds, aid struggling candidates, and legally collect points alongside gratitude. Then sharpened hearing catches another distant clash and redirects that optimistic rescue circuit, sending a white and black blur straight through the trees toward whoever shouted from beyond. The found claw cuts into the new melee, scattering dark limbs and blood across its path, while a terrified woman watches the sudden rescuer sweep past a massive horned demon, leaving several creatures collapsed behind one clean follow-through and another candidate alive. Exchanges of mutual thanks repeat across the preserve as each intervention brings fresh gratitude, until the helper's pounding heart confirms that saving strangers feels better than any numerical reward. Noticing no further intermediate demons, he calls the day lucky and plans to flee anything dangerous, only to discover the Ryudoji heir standing amid a dense circle of varied monsters. Mistaking the scene for a crisis, the newcomer offers assistance from a nearby branch. But before that sentence finishes, enormous blue spiritual energy coils around the surrounded prodigy, who calmly declares the would-be helper an obstruction while taking a decisive sword stance. And raging dragon arm erupts as a towering blue cyclone, annihilating the entire swarm at once. The shocked spectator braces against the blast as severed demon remains and debris fly past, while the untouched prodigy looks back, observes that his accidental audience survived, and turns, then studies that familiar face and identifies him aloud as Kamakiri Haruto. The startled novice asks how this stranger knows him, remembering their collision during the second exam, when the prodigy suddenly attacks from above and drives a blue-lit blade into the hurried guard, forcing the bewildered candidate to demand an explanation while both weapons grind together. His attacker declares that he cannot accept the Sword Emperor's unexplained recommendation, demanding proof of whatever power convinced the nation's strongest swordsman to grant that approval, and fixes a ruthless stare on the specific strength he intends to witness personally. The novice protests that applicants should be hunting demons rather than fighting one another, but the first-ranked candidate dismisses this entire examination as something trivial and meaningless. That word abruptly darkens the listener's expression as red-black energy begins stirring behind him, and the challenger notices something so disturbing that confidence briefly gives way to alarm, instinctively retreating while a monstrous crimson aura rises around the silent target. The prodigy wonders why his body moved backward before conscious thought could justify retreat, as Haruto repeats the insult with a strained smile and anger sharpening every syllable, because this exam became the first opportunity that acknowledged him and revealed a possible future, a life-changing path that may look trivial to someone raised inside overwhelming privilege. In the observation room, the Sword Emperor laughs at altruism powered unapologetically by personal desire, while monitors show the two leading anomalies locked together and their conflict escalating, prompting the pink-haired proctor to note that some candidates attempt this every year, although she considers the current class unusually promising after watching their performances. Yet clashes between applicants at this caliber are normally supposed to be prevented before escalation. The Sword Emperor tells Kusabi to prepare for trouble, only to learn his colleague already has, because dying intermediate demons can become a catalyst for further danger spreading through the preserve. Meanwhile, the enraged candidate raises the found claw and commits to a forceful overhead strike, but the prodigy slips aside as the red-black edge tears a smoking trench through earth. Blue sword arcs immediately answer from every angle, forcing a desperate airborne defense. The barrage recalls training against the Sword Emperor, with attacks arriving almost too quickly to process, while the challenger judges the newcomer's swordsmanship primitive, but recognizes outstanding survival reflexes. Reflex alone cannot explain the unsettling power that made an elite body retreat without thought, so the prodigy presses closer, demanding that every hidden fragment be brought forward, then knocks his target through the air and orders that buried strength to speak. Haruto tumbles backward, curses the interrogation, and asks what this stranger actually wants to know. As numerous demons of wildly different shapes converge around the clearing from every direction, their rushing bodies and intersecting attack paths finally breaking the duel's concentrated rhythm. The surrounded defender warns that a massive pack is moving directly toward them, but the prodigy expected exactly this after deliberately burning demon-attracting incense nearby. Blaming the reckless swordsman only gives the rescuer a stronger reason to confront the oncoming horde, while his opponent calls them mere beasts, provoking accusations of selfishness and demands for his identity. Answered with the perfectly literal introduction, Ryudoji Toya, delivered amid the closing monsters. The exasperated questioner clarifies that he requested an explanation, not a nameplate, before both candidates find their argument completely surrounded by the enormous summoned swarm. For the moment, both swordsmen cut through the closing bodies from above as attacks cross everywhere, until Haruto senses something beyond the immediate swarm and abruptly loses his battle rhythm, reaching toward the airborne prodigy and shouting for him to stop before another descent, then asking whether anything feels strange among the numerous dissolving corpses below. The irritated challenger turns, confused by this sudden interruption in their competitive slaughter, while a warning sensation in the marked arm signals approaching danger, despite confidence and speed, and his opponent explains that defeated demons remain physically formed from miasma for some time. When numerous miasma pools gather simultaneously, their combined concentration becomes something far more dangerous, functioning as bait capable of drawing a demon from a higher rank toward the battlefield, an oppressive presence the inexperienced wielder now feels directly for the first time. Purple miasma condenses into a tall, armored entity suspended above the corrupted clearing, before it descends with black orbs and a crushing eruption that silences every remaining lesser creature, revealing an elegant bone-white body surrounded by floating spheres and decayed ribbon-like limbs. The prodigy recognizes the unmistakable pressure immediately and braces beneath its spiritual weight, while the newcomer initially mistakes this overwhelming arrival for an intermediate demon, only to be corrected. This creature is high level, and the intermediates were those killed earlier. The reckless hunter accepts responsibility after slaughtering too many intermediates within a short span, then claims the high-level monster as personal prey, and orders every potential helper away, receiving a dry agreement and distinctly limited enthusiasm for that ambitious solo plan, before promising to fight his rival next and earning a suggestion to begin the dying personally. Toya advances alone, determined to clean up the catastrophe created by his own reckless hunting, studying the floating spheres as destructive projectiles and measuring their threat before committing, while the high-level demon launches its black orbs, making speed and power the immediate questions. He answers with a blue dragon-shaped technique, accelerating through the crowded firing lanes, and strikes through the nearest defense, briefly opening a route toward the hovering body. But another black sphere already crosses behind him as the creature continues firing. Even so, the challenger decides their speed remains manageable despite the exhausting difficulty, until a severed orb restores itself immediately, turning every successful cut into temporary bookkeeping, and Toya realizes an endurance contest will favor an enemy whose ammunition simply grows back. Haruto's warning arrives as an unseen purple attack slams into the overconfident swordsman's flank, blasting him helplessly across the clearing while the attack leaves no obvious source behind before the visible spheres resume their bombardment and pulverize the ground around the demon. The wounded fighter first suspects his blind spot, then realizes he sensed neither sound nor spiritual energy, as additional invisible impacts hammer him, making this alleged solo cleanup age remarkably badly, until Haruto charges in, repeats his warning, and physically knocks the endangered rival aside, saving both swordsmen from dark portals that appear beneath them and erase everything inside. They land beside the fresh craters, with the rescued challenger finally forced to reassess, because the black spheres responsible for the surprise attacks cannot actually be seen. Explaining why he never detected their presence before, one sliced directly through his body. The visible orbs are merely bait, while the high-level demon's true projectiles remain completely invisible. Toya struggles to understand how his rescuer reacts to attacks that cannot be perceived, while crimson eyes tighten with the concentration of someone recognizing a familiar kind of danger, and the white-haired swordsman braces calmly beneath the unseen projectiles crossing the clearing, then waits as more purple gateways coil into existence overhead. This reaction comes from a self-taught ability Haruto developed before ever possessing spiritual energy, born from protecting himself during years when attacks could arrive at any moment, and sharpened by continuously watching every threat directed toward his vulnerable body, until reading approaching violence became an automatic survival habit rather than conscious analysis, one cruelly rehearsed through the beatings that once filled his everyday life. A single high-level attack could kill instantly, yet the survivor senses death beyond physical evidence, because he has already been genuinely killed once and remembers that fatal threshold, then faced death again and overcame it through later battles against overwhelming opponents. Experiences that further refine the hard-earned perception created during his powerless years. Now Haruto detects the sensation of death within the invisible projectiles racing around him, feeling their lethal approach as though death itself were chasing directly behind him. So he accelerates through the unseen firing pattern without relying upon sight or spiritual detection, and cuts an incoming projectile precisely when its deadly presence enters striking range. The hovering demon responds by surrounding itself with still more visible spheres and hidden gateways. But the endangered candidate accepts how ugly the odds have become and refuses retreat, since other examinees remain threatened and some must be saved only by his sword. The determined candidate declares that the time to act has arrived and steps forward, accepting responsibility for confronting the high-level demon despite its imperceptible ammunition, until Toya calls that ridiculous, insisting such an enemy is beyond any rookie's ability, before asking the critical question. Those hidden projectiles cannot normally be seen, so how can the supposedly inexperienced swordsman follow their movements at all? The wounded prodigy remembers noticing nothing before the first orb struck directly through him, and receives a baffling answer. The deadly objects merely look blurry while approaching, before another intermediate swarm crashes into the clearing and interrupts the explanation, proving the demon-attracting incense has not finished charging interest on that terrible decision. A sweeping blue attack immediately tears through the new monsters surrounding his partner, as Toya unleashes Raging Dragon Arm and volunteers to handle the entire intermediate swarm, assigning his reluctant partner to watch the invisible orbs despite protests about unilateral planning, then insisting alternative counters exist while only the one who sees them can provide warning. His private reasoning is protective. Everyone understands how lethal high-level demons truly are. But the designated spotter realizes that observation alone leaves nobody else capable of intervening, just as the hovering creature launches another dense formation of unseen elongated projectiles, forcing him to cut repeatedly because he remains the only person able to track them. Yet the next blade contact fails to sever its target, exposing a critical limitation. The found claw cuts only what its wielder consciously chooses, requiring clear-cutting intent, so an indistinct target denies full power and turns the next collision into a block. More visible spheres gather around the demon as Haruto searches for a workable target, then changes the premise, deciding to erase everything obstructing his path simultaneously, unleashing broad red slashes throughout the projectile field instead of selecting individual threats. But black-purple impacts still crash around him and tear deep cavities through the ground. The invisible orbs become perceptible only when dangerously close, making precise focus arrive too late, while their numbers multiply faster than he can reduce them, creating an endless defense. So the frustrated swordsman considers ignoring every projectile and rushing their source directly, copying the straight-line commitment demonstrated by the other challenger moments earlier. He threads through exploding impacts with red movement trails wrapping his accelerating body, adjusting the route between hidden attacks until a narrow approach finally appears, and leaps above the demon with his blade raised, convinced he has solved it, before dropping a heavy overhead strike toward the creature's elongated head, only for an unseen sphere stationed beside the target to deflect his blade completely. The invisible defense extends even around the demon itself, blocking the final attack route, and the violent rebound throws the attacker backward before he can recover his stance, leaving him stunned by how thoroughly the attempted shortcut has been anticipated, as multiple hidden strikes hammer his body and keep the blade from reaching its target. Toya turns from the intermediate swarm and calls out in alarm toward his partner, who slams into a tree hard enough to crater the trunk, blood covering one eye, and reaches the painfully concise conclusion that his situation has become extremely bad. The battered swordsman's consciousness begins fading as blood loss and repeated impacts overwhelm him, returning him to the same darkness where death previously seemed absolutely certain. Magatsukami greets the repeat visitor with precisely zero sympathy, calling his near-death performance pathetic, and argues that receiving the 10 claws has done little to improve such incompetence, prompting an objection that their owner disappeared without explaining how these powers actually work. Because invisible targets cannot be deliberately cut before they reveal themselves during an attack, but the entity identifies the real limitation. Its wielder perceives only immediate, direct death, and instructs him to focus upon the enemy rather than each approaching projectile, treating everything the creature uses as part of one unified hostile intention, and imagining every released attack as a blade specifically created to kill him. The lesson transforms the surrounding threats into one radiating storm of conceptual blades, placing the tiny learner beneath Magatsukami's enormous watching eye inside the mental world, where he admits the explanation sounds deceptively easy but finally understands its meaning, before being ordered back because death is already closing around his physical body. Awareness snaps into place against the cratered tree as purple attacks converge from every direction, and several rapid red cuts intercept the barrage before those killing paths can connect, letting the wounded fighter escape while admitting he genuinely expected to die there. That survival clarifies that his previous perception detected only the sensation of imminent death, so he directs greater concentration toward the demon controlling the entire projectile field, reframing everything the creature releases as an extension of one enemy rather than separate ammunition, until every surrounding projectile becomes a malicious blade directed by the demon's single will, enabling Haruto to perceive the previously hidden killing structure clearly across the battlefield, and capture the hostile intention represented by a shadowy skull above the creature, recognizing every separate orb as part of the same enormous weapon aimed toward him. Before the Found Claw severs that entire network and defeats the high-level demon behind it, leaving its exhausted wielder just enough strength to confirm that he succeeded, while Toya can only stare at the impossible reversal without forming a complete response, and the victor collapses among numerous bisected spheres scattered throughout the clearing. His body feels unbearably heavy as accumulated exhaustion proves worse than expected, but the preserve-wide announcement declares the 3-hour third examination officially finished, ordering every candidate to cease combat before the academy begins its forced transfer. Toya approaches the collapsed fighter and admits genuine shock that the reckless rookie survived, then immediately clarifies that survival does not qualify as praise or approval, receiving a tired dismissal from someone who never requested either judgment in the first place. Inside the observation room, officials credit the high-level demon solely to Kamakiri Haruto, explaining that previous candidates defeating such targets always received the highest possible rating, although a colleague notes his combined score remains technically failing while revisiting the wager, and counters that rejecting someone who defeated a high-level demon alone would be absurd. The board places him first at 1,000 over Toya's 990. The headmaster approves admission, forcing the wager's promise to be honored, while one relieved examiner accepts blame for poor preparation yet privately considers the candidate dangerous to the world, Kusabi calmly promises to take responsibility and eliminate the new student if that feared threat emerges, but the glasses-wearing examiner says guiding him away from that outcome is precisely Kusabi's role. Before spring arrives around 8th Martial Hall with cherry blossoms drifting across the entrance, where Tugoku Academy begins its formal entrance ceremony for the newly admitted class. The silver-haired newcomer enters wearing a dark academy uniform with orange shoulder cords, joining hundreds of students inside the hall as the incoming class oath begins. Delivered from the stage by the composed top-ranked entrant representing every new student. While Haruto recognizes Ryu Udoji as the candidate who finished first overall in the entrance examination, he still struggles to believe that someone routinely beaten 1 month earlier actually entered Tugoku, crediting Kaname Akuda and resolving to sharpen his skills while helping people appreciate him, a goal requiring him to become a genuine demon slayer through the academy, until a delayed question interrupts that inspiring declaration about his chosen profession, creating one small complication. He still has no idea what demon slayers actually do. The imposing headmaster suddenly answers the ceremony with a single approving word, appearing at the podium so abruptly that confused students wonder when he arrived, then praising the incoming class as another exceptional group overflowing with extraordinary potential, before driving his sword-like staff into the stage floor and calling that deeply reassuring. Space transforms into a star-filled cosmic expanse with the headmaster hovering at its center, while the entire audience floats helplessly, staring to the impossible artificial sky, and Haruto wonders whether this domain comes from the headmaster's manifestation blade. The headmaster finally defines demon slayers. They risk their lives worldwide to protect ordinary existence and eradicate demons, bearing immense responsibility while cultivating limitless potential and aspirations greater than the universe, then urging the students to trust themselves, keep moving, and develop that potential here. During the speech, students spot Kaname Akuda floating among them inside the cosmic domain, and Haruto finally understands that his helpful acquaintance is actually a famous demon slayer. While the headmaster warns that neither an exalted inner god nor peerless technique determines worth, because every power changes value according to the purpose for which someone wields it, asking why they seek this profession and assigning them to find value within that reason. The question settles over the thoughtful new student as the surrounding class remains suspended, before the headmaster proposes celebrating their beginning and sweeps his glowing sword outward, sending a colossal golden cut through the artificial heavens between the drifting students, as a powerful vortex catches the startled silver-haired boy and spins him through space, until the cosmic domain collapses, returning the entire class beneath blooming trees outside the hall. Kaname congratulates the new students personally as though his appearance requires no additional explanation, while excited classmates marvel that a renowned demon slayer came specifically to encourage them. Then reveal this year's prestigious guest is the Blade Emperor himself, leaving Haruto stunned that his acquaintance stands at the pinnacle of every demon slayer. The celebrated swordsman notices that astonished stare while standing beside another cloaked official, and answers with a cheerful wink that offers precisely none of the missing context, prompting an internal plea for advance warning, though the shocked freshman admits he probably should have noticed. The new students relocate to the enormous building reserved specifically for first-year Class 3, where conversation immediately centers on the Blade Emperor's spectacular ceremony and its emotional impact, while the exhausted newcomer reaches his first lecture room after getting thoroughly lost inside one class building. A familiar blonde official asks whether everyone has arrived and orders the room seated, then introduces himself as Kusabi, Class 3's homeroom teacher and instructor for Shikigami manipulation, triggering whispers about his famous Onmyoto family while one student recognizes the connection, and admirers quietly debate whether the famously cool teacher is single, receiving impressively disciplined silence. The homeroom teacher instead explains Tugoku's structure, beginning with their objective of becoming certified demon slayers, because professional qualification requires earning official certifications through academy training, a safeguard for work where daily demon combat can suddenly cost a slayer's life. So separate tests verify minimum skill in swordsmanship, hand-to-hand combat, onmyoto, shikigami manipulation, and more, with every certification mandatory for both advancement and graduation. One reclining classmate declares this obvious, leaving the confused freshman aware another basic memo escaped him, before their teacher orders everyone outside to understand what certification actually demands, leading Class 3 onto a field lined with towering black stone pillars and prepared tables. Their first demonstration is the Shikigami manipulation exam. Create and control one to destroy a pillar, normally attempted after 6 months of instruction, though success today earns immediate certification by instructor authority, and the class eagerly volunteers because apparently basic education now comes with a 6-month speedrun. As a ponytailed candidate presses one hand over paper and surrounds a folded form with blue energy, summoning a massive ray-shaped shikigami overhead and confidently claiming the first attempt. The first volunteer points forward and sends the glowing ray diving straight toward a waiting pillar, producing a large blue impact cloud against the stone target at full speed, only for the smoke to clear around a completely intact pillar, a brutally concise rejection. With unlimited time and attempts available, frustrated students immediately demand another chance and crowd forward, while an olive-haired classmate watches their glowing shikigami and concludes they have no chance. because basic level control cannot possibly cut a training pillar built to Goku Academy standards. Beside him, Haruto silently studies the blank paper meant to become his own Shikigami. When asked why he is not trying, he admits he has never created one despite regular schools teaching it, then swallows the embarrassment and simply asks the surprised classmate to demonstrate the process. Receiving a hesitant agreement from the student whose confidence briefly needs time to reboot, as repeated attempts leave everyone else panting and openly declaring the task far too difficult. The first volunteer complains that even his manifestation blade cannot scratch the pillar, prompting the instructor to raise a paper talisman and warn that demon slayers never fight with blades alone. Their Amyados must compensate for whatever a manifestation blade lacks, and that supporting discipline faces equally severe standards as his enormous white tiger Shikigami appears. The luminous beast charges down the field, sweeping past the entire formation of black pillars, while its teacher calls the exercise simple, leaving the obstacle course cleanly reduced behind it, and every previously confident student stares ahead in stunned silence. He asks whether admission seemed enough, warning that only graduates become slayers and demanding a harder mindset, because advancement itself requires 6 certifications, making every hour at Goku Academy valuable. The teacher considers crushed expectations essential preparation for this lethal world until an ecstatic success cry interrupts, and he recognizes Kamakiri Haruto beside a trembling pink rabbit-like creature, celebrating his very first Shikigami, then crouching beside the tiny creation and immediately surrendering to how cute it looks. Nearby classmates turn toward the unexpected mascot, their earlier exhaustion briefly displaced by amused smiles. But when its creator approaches the towering target, the instructor declares any certification attempt completely impossible, ordering him back to basic training while privately realizing that carefree enthusiasm has softened the entire class. He ends the session and instructs every student to reconsider the determination demanded by academy life, while the silver-haired freshman studies a campus map since actual classes begin tomorrow and navigation remains undefeated. Toya suddenly appears behind him, recognizes that troubled expression, and bluntly calls it pathetic, earning a startled groan and the entirely fair observation that his greeting needs work, especially after their first meeting involved an unprovoked attack, which he dismisses as too minor for resentment, before asking whether the other student is heading toward the dormitories and which residence he chose, only to learn the overwhelmed new arrival still intends to select one today, a delay that sends his orderly classmate into a common-sense crisis, though several events did arrive simultaneously, including weeks spent sleeping inside a tiny facility storage corner, considered acceptable if weather stayed outside. The blue-haired student insists that an aspiring demon slayer still needs a proper living environment, especially someone admitted through the Sword Emperor's personal recommendation, whose conduct now reflects that honor, then warns him against causing embarrassment and walks away with the lecture apparently complete, leaving Haruto to process again that Kaname Akuta truly stands above every demon slayer. Around the corner, the olive-haired classmate covers his mouth after overhearing that recommendation in stunned disbelief. The eavesdropper regrets merely seeking useful connections until realizing he may have discovered something far better. A mysterious academy newcomer personally recommended by the Sword Emperor, effectively a walking VIP pass, whose inability to make basic Shikigami now suggests extraordinary hidden potential that almost nobody knows about, turning this accidental encounter into destiny and friendship into a remarkably convenient career investment. As the silver-haired student decides to find housing, his newly strategic classmate hurries after him, introduces himself with sparkling confidence as Inari Itsuna, and addresses Kamakiri directly, claiming he anticipated further difficulties and had been searching for an opportunity to help. So the delighted newcomer shakes his hand, accepts this apparent fate, and happily welcomes his first academy friend. One celebrates genuine friendship while the other privately awards himself perfect marks for first impressions, then listens to the immediate problem, explaining that Goku's dormitories have few meaningful differences, until a phone notification interrupts their discussion beside the campus map, revealing a direct message from Akuta that instantly makes the helpful classmate panic. The message recommends Tsukumo Dorm and includes a cheerful photograph beside its ivy-covered sign, confirming the sender's identity while leaving one stunned observer wondering how much he favors this student, who decides to inspect the recommendation, gaining an eager escort inspired by its imperial seal of approval, and both approach the indicated area just as a terrified scream erupts nearby, followed by a sweating student clutching his arm and fleeing the scene at full speed. The two newcomers stare after him, asking what could have triggered that desperate retreat when a gigantic sake bottle crashes upright before them and a voice asks whether more have arrived. Belonging to a towering red-haired woman who lounges on crates and calls the latest visitor scrawny. Asked who she is, the woman casually identifies herself as the dorm mother and nothing less, making the ivy-covered brick building behind her their destination, hidden almost too effectively by its own garden. The silver-haired visitor explains they were recommended here, surprising his companion who never volunteered to move in. While the dorm mother recognizes him as the student Akuta mentioned beforehand, casually drops the Sword Emperor's honorific, then demands an entertaining party trick from her prospective resident, leaving both students frozen by an admission process apparently written after several giant bottles. Though she insists this is her dorm, her decision, and only an impressive performance earns entry. Her manicured hand settles on another oversized sake bottle as she adds one final condition: warning that a boring performance will cost the applicant a bone and explicitly denying any metaphor, before crushing the bottle beneath one hand to demonstrate exactly how literal she intends to be, which explains the earlier retreat and leaves both newcomers staring at an entirely unreasonable housing interview. The olive-haired student recommends withdrawing from this deeply suspicious arrangement, while his friend considers it, but the Blade Emperor personally chose this place, so abandoning it without discovering why feels impossible. And with academy healers supposedly capable of repairing one fracture, the determined applicant accepts despite fierce objections. The dorm mother immediately chooses his increasingly horrified companion to perform first, then demands an answer while the selected volunteer silently calculates every decision that led here, until Inari accepts, darkens with resolve, and declares that whatever follows is officially not his fault, starting his party trick by rapidly slicing an entire head of cabbage with practiced precision, controlling a roaring pan flame while working in an apron and headscarf, then presenting a gleaming banquet of noodles, shrimp, meat, vegetables, and carefully arranged side dishes. The dorm mother silently selects one glazed meatball from the banquet and studies it with severe concentration. Before the first bite widens her eyes, confirming the performance landed exactly where it needed. The newly confident cook even offers to prepare additional bar snacks whenever she wants them. Then Haruto receives his turn and admits that cutting things is his only plausible party trick, an answer the towering judge accepts before leaning close and requesting a live demonstration. As she launches herself high into the flowering tree with astonishing speed, selects one pale petal between golden claws, and marks it with glowing Onmyoto energy, explaining that cutting this enchanted target before it reaches the ground will earn admission. The cook calls a falling petal unfairly difficult, yet the swordsman steps beneath the tree and agrees, so the dorm mother releases the glowing target from her fingers and begins the test, while remembering Kaname's personal request to care for the student he planned to send here. That unusually serious favor makes her curious enough to test him far more harshly, and she drops from the tree, striking the earth with one hand and a violent impact, which blasts countless cherry petals into a dense storm around the waiting swordsman, deliberately hiding the marked target as she measures whether his claimed cutting skill deserves his ambition. But he calmly draws the black-red found claw through the swirling pink curtain, executes one nearly invisible slash, and returns the blade while petals continue filling the courtyard, leaving his companion celebrating despite never seeing the sword itself move. The swordsman opens his fingers to reveal one perfectly sliced half of the enchanted petal, then suggests its missing half landed somewhere nearby as the dorm mother watches in silence. She recalls that only the chosen petal carried spiritual energy, making it visible through the storm, yet tracking and cutting that single moving target so cleanly still required exceptional eyes, especially because every unmarked petal remains completely intact across the courtyard. So the dorm mother grants admission, privately comparing his stubborn resolve to Akuda during his student years. As one friend proudly displays the severed piece, she anticipates turbulent days ahead for both new residents, while a lingering command urges the young swordsman to hurry and reveal his blade's true worth, before morning alarms wake him curled beneath blankets inside his new private room. Warm sunlight reaches the sprawling ivy-covered Tsukumo dorms as its first academy day begins, and the pajama-clad resident follows breakfast smells into the quiet dining room, where Inari greets him in a fur-lined jacket while the dorm mother works behind the counter, explaining his new apron came with immediate kitchen duty after yesterday's culinary performance, while every veteran resident remains aggressively asleep behind doors warning visitors not to wake them. A complete breakfast of rice, soup, grilled fish, vegetables, and sides awaits at the table, making the newcomer beam over eating with other people as his exhausted cook collapses beside him, until he remembers an urgent question and asks his new friend for guidance, specifically whether someone can communicate with the entity dwelling inside a manifestation blade, explaining that he spoke with his enormous inner presence when first receiving the weapon, but their weak connection ended the conversation, while such immediate contact is apparently extremely rare. His friend says several stages normally precede genuine dialogue with a blade, then recommends Urushisaya, the Academy's blade studies instructor and enthusiastic manifestation blade expert. Haruto agrees to approach the instructor after class, turning breakfast advice into today's first objective, before the morning physical augmentation session begins outside beneath the Academy's towering pagoda. Students wearing full-body weights launch through a sprawling obstacle course at distinctly inhuman speeds, while their pink-haired instructor warns that Demon Slayer reinforcement belongs far beyond ordinary athletics. His exhausted friend protests that merely moving those weights already consumes everything he has. As spiritual energy crackles around the heavy rings locked over his wrists and ankles, the silver-haired newcomer nevertheless clears the final obstacle and crosses the finish line first. Earning a decent time alongside criticism that every movement wastes far too much energy, the instructor says he is brute-forcing reinforcement with raw spiritual power, guaranteeing an eventual wall, But the breathless student suddenly laughs while classmates lie scattered like yesterday's ambitions. Proper instruction at Sword God High makes him genuinely happy after years of exclusion, and the stern instructor silently studies the tears gathering beneath his relieved smile. Having read his file, she confirms nobody taught him before and promises that change is here, then immediately orders 10 additional laps, because mercy apparently remains outside today's curriculum. Afternoon brings the classroom lecture on blade studies, matching the breakfast plan perfectly, where Urushisaya calls the subject life's second philosophy and begins explaining humanity's spiritual partners. Nearby, his friend fights sleep while hearing that divine and elemental spirits cannot directly manifest, because boot camp already emptied his stamina and the droning theory now targets his eyelids. Meanwhile, the former outcast listens with shining concentration, leaving his collapsing friend quietly astonished, as a previously forbidden world finally reveals how everyone else learned to confront their blades. His sleepy partner decides such fearless focus makes the newcomer an ideal future teammate, then mentally launches the Easy Street Demon Slayers partnership. Branding apparently comes before graduation. After class, the determined student catches Urushisaya before he can leave the lecture hall, asks about the entity inside his manifestation blade, and receives an invitation to walk, because hearing that direct contact already occurred sends the expert's curiosity through the ceiling, and he sprints across campus firing questions faster than his baffled students can answer. Learning the sword god demanded its blade's true worth convinces him this experiment could work, especially since helping the student will satisfy his own formidable curiosity at the same time. While habitual blade use offers the fastest route toward effortless communication through a stronger connection, so the eager professor leads both students toward a specialized training facility across campus. Its blade studies arena is spiritually reinforced enough to withstand an entire certification examination, and one silent wooden mechanical puppet standing inside provides the reason for their visit. Because Blade Replica Puppet Model 7 represents the absolute pinnacle of mechanical onmyoto construction, complete with a back-mounted slot where the challenger must connect their manifestation blade. The silver-haired student draws Found Claw and carefully fits it into the weighting mechanism, where contact immediately unleashes a violent red-black aura around both challenger and replica, before he realizes the machine is rapidly draining his spiritual energy through the connected weapon, analyzing that power to become an equally skilled opponent. A custom boss fight made portable, whose defeat doubles as the Blade Studies certification exam and a path toward true worth. So the startled challenger tightens his grip and accepts the battle now forming around him. His companion questions whether instant certification is remotely legal, but the head instructor simply claims authority, citing the challenger's entrance exam victories and high-level demon kill as more than sufficient qualification, which reveals to his stunned friend that the newcomer ranked even above Toya, while the professor admits research curiosity is the real admission ticket behind this accelerated exam. He desperately wants to discover what lies inside a blade acknowledged by the Sword Emperor, then calls his student's companion equally opportunistic, making one private career scheme feel suddenly transparent before directly asking the sword god whether his little mechanical toy meets its standards, with the arena's complete barrier ensuring no spiritual aura can escape this isolated sandbox. As the replica groans beneath the connected Found Claw, its wooden body begins changing until a towering eruption of violet-black miasma blasts outward and swallows the machine, violently hurling the challenger bleeding across the floor beneath one massive dark limb, while an unfamiliar voice coolly judges its wooden vessel fragile yet conveniently serviceable. The wounded swordsman rises and stares toward the corruption, unable to understand the transformation, as the puppet finishes becoming a towering horned armored figure wrapped in seething violet decay, and the professor realizes the entity deciphered his spell matrix before hijacking the replica's body, while the challenger recognizes that unmistakably vile miasma and reaches one terrifying conclusion. The towering presence is Magatsukami, now staring through the puppet with glowing violet eyes, making his horrified friend recoil from the thing that had been living inside Found Claw. But the possessing entity merely looks past its vessel and dismisses both witnesses as pests, leaving the professor and his suddenly exposed accomplice staring back in shared alarm. The possessed giant springs directly toward the two waiting witnesses with one claw extended, then brutally sweeps them into the arena wall beneath a crushing violet-black impact, while the wounded swordsman races through settling dust and desperately shouts their names, finding both friends collapsed together, bleeding and unconscious beneath a deeply cratered wall. He demands an explanation, but the towering invader answers with one contemptuous command to stop talking, because Haruto remains dangerously weak and repeated near-deaths threaten the entity's mysterious goal, so it orders him into a fighting stance and promises to teach him proper power, while ominous pressure surrounds the student whose attention remains fixed on his fallen companions. His opponent immediately warns him not to let that divided attention wander again before one vicious strike tears through the wall and launches him across the arena, then appears behind the staggering fighter, condemning anyone who looks away during a challenge, as a second gesture hurls an enormous slab through the already shattered training ground. When the battered student asks whether anything is being held back, the answer is absolutely not, while the possessor casually breaks a wooden finger and criticizes its convenient vessel's miserable durability, making the student wonder whether pulling it free would force the fragile body to self-destruct. Yet the invader discerns that plan from his face and calls the visible hesitation spineless. It raises one claw and fires another dark strike beyond the startled challenger, deliberately cutting his unconscious friend's hand and splashing blood across the cracked floor, then coldly promises the next attack will land on the wounded student himself, which turns his fear into furious resolve as he glares back at the possessed puppet. Haruto insists his goal is helping people, but the entity blames him for placing others within range, then establishes a brutal deadline: pierce it with one flash before the puppet rots or witnesses die, sending the furious swordsman charging overhead with Found Claw blazing in red-black energy, only for his full descending strike to crash harmlessly against a hidden defensive barrier. Its hardness makes his first instinct painfully familiar: simply pour even more spiritual energy into Found Claw, but his opponent counters before the leisurely charge finishes and sends him tumbling away, ordering the small fry to use his brain and invent a better solution. So he converts one deflected slash into cover for a concealed second strike. The layered attack detonates beneath the airborne entity while its challenger follows from overhead, yet his tutor identifies the three-finger severing claw as infinite sharpness created through concentrated energy, and the student realizes neither shield nor slash is soft enough to eliminate charging entirely, while the entity privately considers killing this stubborn brat to force another awakening. The desperate student refuses, declaring Inari the first genuine friend he has ever made, but his tormentor notes that emotional declarations usually produce the opposite effect on enemies, then redirects another violent attack as the horrified swordsman screams for it to stop, forcing him to hurl himself between the strike and his two unconscious companions. The entity asks whether losing his first friend would leave him permanently hollow and alone, especially when his own helplessness would make any lifetime of regret feel insufficient, until the battered swordsman finally recognizes that every cruel threat is deliberately provoking him. But this time he notices the manipulation before letting it dictate his next move. He remembers cutting through the violent assault with surprisingly little spiritual energy while protecting others, and asks what made that desperate strike fundamentally different from every failed attempt, until his tutor answers that protecting anyone requires staying alive, then turning aggressively offensive once safe, so he rejects the unnecessary reminder and charges forward to carve his own path through. His renewed thrust crashes straight into the entity's circular barrier without piercing its center, and the replica tosses him aside, dismissing the attack as far too light, demanding genuine concentration while violet power gathers around one raised, splintered mechanical claw, before releasing a dark strike powerful enough to erupt across the ruined arena. A forest of violet-black energy spikes tears upward around the possessed puppet from that effortless motion, yet the swordsman notices such overwhelming force appeared without any visible time spent gathering energy. As the morning instructor's warning about compensating through wasteful volume returns with perfect timing, revealing posture, movement, and flow as the keys to eliminating unnecessary spiritual expenditure. He focuses on directing energy through Found Claw continuously instead of stockpiling it, then surges through the devastated arena with a far cleaner, faster attack trajectory, slipping behind the entity and leaving fresh damage across its decaying wooden vessel, which makes the wounded tutor acknowledge his progress before immediately preparing another test. It raises one damaged arm and promises the next exchange will determine whether that success was luck, unleashing multiple violet constructs that hammer through the broken floor and converge rapidly, while the challenger evades their crossing paths and confirms power never needed static storage, because stored water stagnates, whereas continuous flow becomes a waterfall capable of shattering boulders. Spiritual energy must circulate through the body and concentrate precisely wherever reinforcement becomes necessary, since wrapping everything indiscriminately wastes power no differently from keeping every muscle permanently tense. So he consciously guides the current from his dantian through back, shoulders, arms, and palms, then channels every remaining drop through his fingertips and directly into the waiting manifestation blade. That concentrated stream floods Found Claw with dense red-black power as its wielder descends, while his opponent answers by stacking three glowing violet barriers across the attack path. But the challenger holds his focus and carries the flowing current through the blade, releasing a refined severing claw that strikes every defensive layer in one motion. A colossal red-black arc tears across the arena and scatters fragments from the failing vessel, cutting all three supposedly rock-hard barriers completely apart during the same continuous swing. While the collapsing tutor identifies localized concentration as the foundation of spiritual reinforcement, then declares the blade's true value awakened because its wielder finally satisfied every condition. Found Claw begins violently convulsing with red-black energy, thoroughly confusing its exhausted owner, as the ruined arena dissolves into violet darkness and the entity calls its host high maintenance, because he has now reached their shared mental world through his own strengthened connection, where the enormous stone presence can finally communicate its true objective without interruption. The entity identifies itself as Muten, the Peerless, and explains why it reached the surface, searching for a man who wields a manifestation blade with an ice-clear, translucent edge, and when the surprised swordsman asks why this mysterious wielder matters matters so much. Muten answers without any ceremony that its sole intention is simply killing him. The shocked student asks whether he is being ordered to kill someone, but hears a warning that this target may become his enemy too, though forgiveness remains possible after learning the truth, so he promises to search for the mysterious wielder, because a promise still carries weight, while demanding in exchange that Muten never again endanger any person around him. The entity accepts that condition, provided its partner faithfully completes his own side of the bargain, then warns that protecting precious people requires enough strength to make such promises enforceable, calling this heavy responsibility the destiny earned by becoming entangled with the dangerous god. Their mental world fades, leaving the swordsman above the crumbled puppet as violet embers disappear, until his teacher approaches and asks whether the possessing entity could actually be reasoned with, explaining that blade-dwelling gods seek dialogue, making supernatural negotiations another unusually serious faculty duty. While the student reflects that possession began as a trick allowing the entity's will to manifest, yet its residual energy remains so ominous that real combat would have required another drawn blade. He confesses responsibility for the destruction and grieves over hurting the first friend he ever made, but the instructor says he performed well and confidently insists that wounded friend will understand. Still, the older man connects recent ominous incidents with the irregular anomaly, Kamakiri Haruto, pausing alone within the bright arena as a deeply unwelcome certainty settles over him that fate's gears have begun turning while the student finds his injured friend bleeding nearby. The silhouettes behind recent events reinforce that gathering shadow and the movement of fate, before the story returns to a packed classroom where ordinary lessons resume after the chaos, and the recovering friend asks what ultimately happened with the Sword God certification exam. He reveals that he passed, although official approval remains suspended until his instructor submits a report, which still counts as victory and leaves his relieved classmate openly impressed by the result. Before the swordsman apologizes for dragging him into danger and receives unconditional reassurance between friends, making the silver-haired student tearfully thank the first peer who accepted him so warmly. He celebrates true friendship while his smiling companion privately calls the favor pure luck with excellent returns, until their demonology instructor announces actual combat training, beginning today with a mock exercise, ordering everyone into teams of 3 whose cooperation should become trustworthy enough to protect lives. The socially isolated student only knows Inari, leaving both friends uncertain about finding their third member, and they realize the classroom has already erupted into rapid negotiations among prepared classmates, apparently missing their opportunity before a hesitant purple-haired girl quietly approaches their desk, asking whether one position remains open and receiving an immediate cheerful welcome aboard. Their demonology simulation occurs inside a special facility containing low-level Shikigami and an intermediate boss demon, where Team 8 must suppress every enemy and secure the building before beginning its attempt, as all 3 draw weapons and discuss teamwork, including a warning against one member carrying everyone. The silver-haired swordsman agrees, then warmly introduces himself to their new teammate, Kaino, who blushes, smiles, and thanks him before the newly formed group starts coordinating its roles. Their green-haired strategist asks about her magic, learning she specializes in destructive fire attribute techniques, while identifying himself as support and assigning the fire fuser beside him to secure territory, then gives their strongest fighter the scouting role, which the quiet swordsman accepts without hesitation. The strategist privately enjoys looking dependable as his scout immediately strikes a Shikigami upstairs. More simulated demons begin appearing, and the scout darts upstairs after promising to investigate alone, leaving his teammates below while their strategist privately hopes nobody discovers how absurdly skilled their ace is. Before the first floor swarms with Shikigami, and he promises their nervous newcomer reliable support, the purple-haired fighter agrees, letting him activate flare-up across his waiting blade. His blazing scorching heavens tears through nearby constructs with a sweeping burst of amplified fire, but those flames surge high enough to scorch him, prompting urgent demands that she lower output, and after apologizing, she announces another enemy while adding a speed enhancement to his movement, which launches him uncontrollably through the cramped corridor and into walls with spectacular efficiency. His body slams violently into another surface before the accelerated swordsman can regain control, and he collapses, realizing extreme speed buffs are poorly suited for indoor combat, while his embarrassed partner apologizes again and offers to provide cover fire instead, only for a green blast to erupt beside him, turning support into immediate friendly fire territory. More green slashes whip around the battered strategist, forcing him to dodge and shout warnings until he demands that Kano stop for a moment and finally pull herself together, openly noting her mounting accidents now look almost deliberate rather than merely incompetent, as she hides a laugh behind one hand and lets a menacing green aura rise. Her pleasant facade finally cracks, and she admits that pretending everything was accidental is difficult, prompting the bruised support fighter to stop playing along and demand her actual objective, though she claims no personal grudge and casually admits she never learned his name, before requesting a 2-day nap, so tomorrow's practice leaves Haruto entirely to her. The obsessed girl opens hostilities by swinging her glowing blade and releasing a roaring wind needles barrage, forcing the strategist to evade while deciding her fixation has turned their exercise into genuine combat. Before he plants one foot, regains control, and prepares to answer the incoming attack, sweeping his flaming sword directly across the advancing green wind with determined force. He invokes mutual generation, explaining that wind strengthens fire, then asks who should fear injury now, having realized she is actually a support specialist and believing intimidation can crush her fighting spirit. So he offers a quiet surrender while small blue water spirits suddenly gather around him, leaving the confident swordsman visibly confused by the harmless-looking creatures floating strangely nearby. Their water erupts into a heavy wave that smothers his flames and crashes over him, knocking the strategist flat into a puddle as elemental theory becomes painfully practical, while his opponent explains mutual overcoming and uses Onmyoto to erase every unfavorable matchup, making him realize her Onmyoto ability is stronger than the power of her manifestation blade. She calmly declares his defeat and gathers water across her blade for the finishing attack, releasing Serpent's Rain as several massive water beasts surge toward the fallen target, only for the ceiling to collapse violently between them beneath an enormous descending impact, revealing their silver-haired scout perched on the intermediate boss demon and apologizing for the damage. The soaked strategist recognizes his returning ally and immediately feels their odds improve, as the scout turns upon the green creature and receives an urgent warning from below, while the suddenly radiant girl claims he has saved her again and celebrates their reunion, confusing him with that word until she realizes he may not remember their previous encounter. The scout finally connects Kaeno with a white-haired candidate he encountered during the third entrance exam, delighting her despite his explanation that her appearance and entire atmosphere now seem completely different, because she proudly reveals a dedicated makeover performed entirely for the boy who rescued her, then asks whether the new look suits her and receives his blushing approval. Their soaked teammate tries entering the conversation, but the enamored girl smoothly ignores him, as her remaining water formations suddenly unravel into harmless splashes throughout the ruined room, followed by a casual apology that leaves the battered strategist dripping and silently exasperated, while she clings to her rescuer and praises him for single-handedly defeating the boss demon. Watching their affectionate exchange, the strategist concludes their greatest simulated threat was never the boss, before the smiling girl declares the area secured and suggests reporting their success to faculty, and evening settles over the ivy-covered Tugoku dormitory after their exhausting practical exercise, where the bruised student calls his day disastrous while his roommate asks what happened. He initially dismisses everything, then reluctantly begins explaining there was a problem involving Kaeno, only for that problem to lean around the corner in pajamas and ask about herself, shocking him further by revealing that she also lives inside Tsukumo dorm with them, which he immediately doubts is coincidence after recalling her watching during his dorm entrance test. Before he can finish the accusation, she swiftly covers his mouth with one hand, smiling menacingly while warning that revealing her secret will bring consequences he already understands, until their puzzled roommate notices the intimate struggle and asks what is wrong. So the cornered strategist proposes exchanging team contacts, and both new partners enthusiastically agree. Their next demonology assignment targets lower demons inside an abandoned hospital saturated with vessel-forming miasma, where Class 3 must face real enemies under faculty supervision and an invited active demon slayer, a relaxed dark-haired swordsman who introduces himself casually despite the instructors demanding respect, while excited students immediately recognize the famous guest standing before them as Yuma Ozuchi. The confused newcomer asks whether their visitor is famous, astonishing his far better informed teammate, who explains the first-rate slayer achieved last year's highest recorded demon kill count, before the celebrity slips between both boys, and dismisses that achievement as nothing especially impressive, because a high total merely proves he spent his time defeating weaker opponents. The startled strategist wonders when their guest approached, but receives instructions to stop chatting, allowing the irritated faculty member to continue briefing everyone on their imminent extermination mission, though the guest quietly praises the silver-haired student's sharp vision for tracking every movement, before assignments are distributed according to the sprawling abandoned hospital's detailed floor plan. Each team must enter its designated wing and eliminate every demon appearing within that territory, while their guest bluntly warns death remains possible, earning an immediate rebuke from faculty, then offers the best-performing team a yakiniku feast, somehow making the briefing less reassuring, although one hungry swordsman instantly fixates on grilled meat where mortal danger failed completely. Team 8 receives the Western Wing's 5th and 6th floors before entering together with drawn blades, and the silver-haired member immediately senses a sinister presence intensifying throughout the hospital, as Muten's small apparition materializes atop him and identifies a nearby low-level Naraka, explaining that the scent of a demon drew it out to investigate personally. The apparition reveals someone is artificially creating a Naraka outside, apparently their blonde homeroom instructor, prompting its host to ask how demons reach humanity when Naraka supposedly means their gathering place. Although his tutor first mocks that he survived this long without knowing, earning sharp dismissal, then explains that miasma generated through human activity becomes a vessel summoning demons here. Areas of especially concentrated miasma miasma become naraka, where larger numbers and stronger demons readily appear, before the smoky guide tells its host to examine what surrounds the hospital, revealing an enormous violet magical barrier spread across the cloudy sky above them, which regulates naraka density like a shutoff valve controlling water through a faucet. It deliberately attracts weaker demons to consume excess miasma, impressing Haruto despite Muten's dismissive response. Meanwhile, the famous supervisor loses a quiet duel against ordinary hospital signs and directions, while another student formation corners a mid-level demon amid shouted warnings against reckless separation, and their combined sword attacks carve bloody wounds across the creature inside that corridor. Their observing guest criticizes the recklessness and advises broadening awareness for long-term survival, prompting the chastened young fighters to acknowledge his guidance while maintaining their bloodied formation. As the blonde instructor remotely watches from the roof through circling paper shikigami, until his visiting colleague joins him and questions such distant supervision without personal encouragement. The two trade barbs about maintaining broad perspective and possessing the proper professional mindset before the guest asks why he suddenly teaches demonology and what happened to Maneki, learning the absent teacher became ill and the headmaster personally requested a replacement that morning, though the substitute himself had immediately wondered why that responsibility specifically fell upon him. A flashback begins as the headmaster searches for words to explain his peculiar request, recalling three sparrows once lying neatly along a windowsill and refusing to leave his thoughts because something felt wrong. Yet he ignored the insignificant warning and continued with his day, only to lose three friends during the extermination mission that followed later that same day. He believes greater attention might have saved them, leaving him sensitive to even minor irregularities, so he chose the most capable available substitute and requested vigilance throughout today's supervision, promising that, if nothing happened, they could laugh at him and share drinks afterward. The guest understands since Headmaster Tadamitsu Kaname is the current Sword Emperor's remarkably perceptive older brother, while the substitute admits Class 3 already contains more than enough unsettling variables to monitor. His colleague mentions the boy the Sword Emperor rescued, whose ominous sword is balanced by genuine friendships, but comparing that child with someone from the instructor's bitter past makes the blonde man snap furiously, until the visitor warns that personal feelings obscure judgment and urges seeing people as they are now. Back inside, the silver-haired fighter warns his titits that a mid-level demon is charging their way, before the massive red creature meets intersecting green wind and blazing orange sword attacks. As the bickering pair demands cooperation from each other while attacking in perfect accidental sync, and the green-haired strategist privately vows to show the silver-haired teammate exactly what he can do, while his purple-haired partner blushes over the same target, determined to win acknowledgement herself, then both competitors carve through the demon while accusing each other of getting in the way, leaving their watching teammate impressed by their fighting spirit and convinced Yakiniku must fuel it, even as the lingering miasma around him suddenly gathers into an ominous haze. Outside, a mysterious straw-hatted swordsman praises the assembled sacrifices and prepares to judge their quality, before drawing a blade and descending through the storm amid a violent burst of lightning, then plunging straight through the hospital's glowing control barrier and shattering its layered circles. As a violent tremor immediately alerts both rooftop supervisors and every student still fighting inside, while the silver-haired swordsman turns toward the disturbance as Muten senses the abrupt change, and his teammates spot another miasma stain forming nearby, bracing together for whatever emerges, when a colossal many-faced demon erupts through the corridor and hurls the purple-haired fighter away, leaving her alone before its towering fused bodies as her green-haired partner shouts anxiously, until their silver-haired ally launches past her and cleaves the giant creature into scattered chunks, then lands beside its collapsing remains and immediately checks whether the stunned girl survived. Neither student can classify the monster, only recognize it differs from everything previously encountered, before more grotesque demons materialize from spreading miasma, making the corridor a production line for nightmares. As the blonde instructor broadcasts that someone destroyed the control barrier, flooding Naraka with enormous miasma, and dispatches support Shikigami to every team while ordering the students to prioritize survival, so the trio agrees to hold their position until the teachers reach them. Their spectral companion warns miasma has swallowed the area and upper-level demons will keep appearing, because something even higher is already approaching, its violet eyes opening within the darkness, and the apparition finally identifies the approaching nightmare as nothing less than a superclass demon.